I want to welcome everyone to our workshop today using participatory tools for evaluation research. Today's event is sponsored by American University's Measurement and Evaluation Program. At American University, we are committed to pursuing inclusive excellence. One of our practices, shared from our Indigenous and Native communities, is to offer a land acknowledgement at the beginning of our meetings and events. The goal is to build our mindfulness of the historical processes in which we still participate. American University is founded on the unceded land of the Nacotchtank, Anacostan, and Piscataway peoples. I ask you to join me in acknowledging these communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. American University also acknowledges that it was founded upon exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples, including those on whose land this institution is located. With this acknowledgement, we commit to working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Those of you who attend our events know that we always provide a land acknowledgement. I would encourage you to take this a step further today and do some research on the land where you are sitting. If you are in the US or Canada or Australia, you can click on the links below that one of our moderators will put in the chat to do a little bit of research on the land where you are. As we get started today, I am going to introduce you to the two moderators who are overseeing our workshop today. They are both students in our Master's in Measurement and Evaluation program. Dori Stone will be our Zoom moderator. She'll introduce our speakers and field questions on Zoom. And Sarah Hennessey will be our Facebook live stream moderator, who will let us know if any questions arise on the Facebook feed. And she'll wrap up the session at the end, giving us a summary of what we have learned today. So take it away, Dori.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. And before we get started today, we would like to hear where you're all joining us from. So if folks would like to just write in the chat where you're currently located today, and I'll read some of those out. I see Minnesota, Manchester, Nairobi, Kenya, Pakistan, Brazil, Galveston, Texas, St. Louis, Missouri, Lusaka, Zambia, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Nepal, Bethesda, Maryland, Costa Rica, Sierra Leone, India, Liberia, France, Egypt, Nigeria, Senegal, Kenya, Tanzania, Botswana, Guatemala City, Zimbabwe, Ghana. This is incredible. We are all over the world joining in for this webinar today. It's so wonderful to see the broad reach and how we're all coming together from such diverse locations. Sarah, do you see anyone on the Facebook feed putting in their locations?
I don't think we have anyone yet, but excited about the breadth we've got here on Zoom.
Yes, the list is ongoing, more and more countries all around the world. So this is wonderful to have you all here. Thank you again for joining today. And today on our panel, we have 3 speakers who are all students or alumni in the Measurement and Evaluation program at American University. Netta, Jeremy, and Zachariah will all be sharing with us today, and I'll let them introduce themselves as they speak. If you have any questions during this webinar, you can post those in the chat or in the Q&A here on Zoom, and after each speaker, we'll take a little time to read off and give them a chance to answer the questions that have come in. So feel free to post your questions, and I think with that, we're ready to begin. So take it away, Netta.
Thank you so much, Dori. I really appreciate the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Netta Mousa. I'm coming to you all as an alumni from American University's Master's in Measurement and Evaluation program. I currently work in the education space, touching on evaluation and data collection. I'm really honored to have this time with you all today to do a deeper dive on participatory tools and how this is a practice in equity and evaluation. To start us off, we want to talk about what is equity, right? What is equity and what is it in terms of evaluation? At its broadest scope, equitable evaluation design, implement, and interpret all aspects of work from the lens of fairness and justice for invested community members. That is the baseline of equity, right? About justice, and it's about fairness. An equitable evaluation, though, embraces a lot of these characteristics before you hear on the slide. Embraces complexity, challenges a lot of our preconceived notions. It innovates data collection, and this is exactly where we're going to see the participatory tools come in, and interrogates flawed system based on injustices. And in doing all of this, we have to consistently invite diverse voices into the space of conducting our evaluation. Participatory tools touches on innovating data collection and inviting diverse voices. So really in this practice, it is a practice in equitable evaluation. If we can go to the next slide, please. So participatory tools in action. So participatory evaluation is an approach that involves the invested community members of a program or policy in the evaluation space. And I want to take a moment to really unpack this word, invested community members. Invested community members are often referred to as your stakeholders, right? Who is impacted by this evaluation? Who is this evaluation for? Who can benefit from this evaluation? Who will it impact? All of those folks, all of those stakeholders are your invested community members. And framing it as such, we invite this openness about who is included in this process, right? And in using participatory tools as a form of manifesting and perpetuating equity, we ask those very same questions, right? Who is involved in the evaluation? How is the program impacting invested community members? What is and isn't being evaluated? So participatory tools are all of that in action. They are us taking an opportunity to innovate our data collection, to be able to empower participants to come and voice their impressions of the evaluation. But in order to do that, right, in order to even design equitable participatory tools, we have to ask, who's involved? How is the program impacting these people? What isn't, again, being evaluated? That is the start of how participatory tools begins and manifests equity in action. Now let's do a deeper dive, if we can go on to the next slide, about some of the strengths and challenges of participatory tools, right? Again, we want to emphasize that these tools are ways to invite your invested community members to the space and access data collection that you wouldn't normally otherwise collect. And I'll allow my colleagues on this webinar to dive deeper into specific types of tools. But here, I want to look at what are the general strengths and challenges of participatory tools. You're probably like, well, Netta, this sounds great. Why isn't everyone doing participatory tools, right? Because it comes with both. It comes with you have your strengths, and those strengths are, again, you're inviting diverse voices, innovating your data collection, empowering your participants, and this one is one of my most favorite ones, and improves capacity building. And then similarly too, it's like a lot of these challenges include time constraints, resources, and I apologize, complete typos. Empowering participants and establishing foundations for continuous learning is definitely not a challenge, so I apologize on that front. But really focusing on the resources. Oftentimes you're working in spaces that don't have all the necessary resources that you will need to innovate and begin to invite your participants. And participants and your invested community members can be even difficult to access given the nature of where they're operating from. For example, working in rural locations where you don't have access directly to your invested community members due to just plain old cannot reach them, whether it's through tech, whether it's literally physically cannot go. Those are all kinds of restraints around your resource, around ability to invite your participants. And I also think this challenges invites more creativity to how you can invite those voices into the space using various other participatory tools. And again, my colleagues on the call will discuss different tools and when they're best used and how and why. And if we can go to the fifth slide, please. A lot of what I hear is a lot of important considerations that you need to take. I've already mentioned a lot, right, about who, what, how, and why. Those are the biggest things. And we also have to reconsider and continue to consider whose participation matters. And why does this participation matter? When should their participation be invited to the discussion is also very important to consider. When you're thinking about your evaluation, who matters, who's this evaluation for, who will it impact? You also want to understand when should their participation be invited into the discussion. Should you do this at the get-go, at the start, before even you start designing out, setting up your questions for your evaluation? Do you want to have the opportunity to collect that kind of pre-work? Or do you want it to be further down when you've already captured a lot of knowledge and information from traditional data collection to then be more innovative and lean into participatory tools as a way of innovating your thinking? So really thinking about this one, I'll emphasize it here, is really, really important. Okay. And so as we're thinking and as you're sitting through this session today, keep in mind these values of equity. Who is this evaluation for? When should their voices be invited to the space? And even think about what voices are not invited into the space and why. Right? Considering these mindsets and putting ourselves in this mindset of equity and justice can really help set us up for a very impactful way to use participatory tools. I'm going to pass it off to my colleague who will take it over and share a lot more about participatory mapping and seasonal calendars.
Thank you, Nida, for that fantastic overview of equitability and how participatory tools can be leveraged to achieve this important goal, a lofty goal indeed, but very important. So yeah, I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Jeremy Starr, and I am a master's candidate at American University's Master of Science in Measurement Evaluation. I also work at an international development company called DAI as a monitoring and evaluation and learning specialist. And before doing that, I was a Peace Corps volunteer for agroforestry in Guinea-Conakry for 2 years. So yeah, let's just jump right in. So I'm going to talk about two specific types of participatory tools you can use in M&E, that being participatory mapping and seasonal calendars. I'm going to start with why you would use these two tools in the first place. And then I will have a couple more slides that give visual examples of participatory mapping and seasonal calendars. So let's jump right in. So for starters, why would you use these tools? First off, for doing needs assessments or for community development planning. These two methods are often used at the initial stages, right? For example, during a baseline assessment, when you're trying to gather all the baseline data and information for whatever activity, big or small, you're doing. These tools can help assess the community's existing resources, strengths, and challenges, providing a strong foundation for strategic planning and identifying areas for intervention. This can help guide the design and implementation of more targeted evidence-based interventions and services. The second one deals with capturing knowledge of local community members, which is very important when we're doing equitable research. Basically, you don't know what you don't know. So by getting community members involved, you will likely gather information and data that you would not normally discover on your own, through your own research, especially with secondary resources. The third one, again, relating to equitable research, is building community ownership of development projects. By involving community members in the process, it fosters a sense of ownership and encourages active participation in the development planning. This is also especially important when you're trying to promote sustainability in your activities. The fourth one deals with facilitating stakeholder engagement, especially when you're confronted in an area or community who has a range of diverse stakeholders. So this can facilitate engagement between many different actors, whether it be just individual community members, local organizations, government agencies, private sector industries, so on and so forth. It can create a platform for dialogue and collaboration which can help with equitable joint decision making. These sessions can help build relationships when done correctly, and you can identify shared goals, and you can foster partnerships for other community development initiatives. I do want to just quickly note on that, when you're confronted in a community with a lot of different stakeholders, it is important that you assess relationships and power dynamics between these stakeholders within the community before organizing these joint sessions. A very quick and easy example is if you're doing a mapping exercise comprised of, say, both adults and youth participants, this could result in adults usurping the entire exercise because of the power imbalance between ages, and you could potentially lose key insights from the youth population. This can be mitigated by having multiple sessions of community mapping exercises with different stakeholder groups rather than just one larger joint session. For instance, having just one session with adults, you could find that village and savings and loan associations or microfinance institutions are identified as a critical landmark. Conversely, if you have a session with just youth, especially youth who are not required to contribute to family incomes, they may not even point this out. They could instead point out maybe a local community center, right, where they play sports, study, and generally build stronger relationships with their youth peers. This is just an example to let you know it's critical to acquire the perspectives of every demographic within a community to make sure that all voices are heard and you get a full picture drawn of the assets and resources within a community. And finally, advocating and empowering communities to address local issues. Again, this is extremely important in equitable M&E. You know, by visually representing a community's assets, needs, and challenges, it could enable a community to articulate their aspirations and concerns and even address challenges that they're currently facing. I can give one quick example. I know there are a lot of indigenous communities in certain regions of the South American rainforest who have participatorily mapped their natural resources and natural assets. This has resulted in some communities leveraging kind of low-tech options such as small drones to kind of monitor illegal resource extraction from nefarious actors who may be extracting, say, timber or mineral resources. And they've been able to use this information to ultimately protect their legally owned natural resources and get recourse. And just finally, on seasonal calendars, I wanted to mention that they're particularly effective for projects dealing with climate change, NRM, disaster risk reduction, resilience, and food security and nutrition. I'm not going to get into too much detail on that because that could be a whole presentation on its own. So yeah, that's why you would use participatory mapping and seasonal calendars. Could we go to the next slide, please? So I just want to quickly go over the types of participatory mapping exercises, and then we can get into seasonal calendars after that. By all means, this list is not comprehensive. There are dozens of different techniques, many of which combine and permutate in a multitude of different ways. This list just gives you a taste of what can be done. Ultimately, it's up to you guys as the researchers to critically think on the context of the community and the purpose of the project that you're implementing, and implement the best method or methods that work best for you. So the first one is geographic mapping. This involves just creating a map that captures physical features like landmarks, infrastructure, and boundaries, and so on and so forth of a community. It can provide a spatial representation of the community's assets and can be used for planning purposes. The second one is asset mapping, which relates more to individual and group capacities rather than looking at natural resources and brick and mortar landmarks. Asset mapping focuses on identifying and mapping the strengths, skills, and capacities of individuals and group within the community, such as identifying individuals, for example, who are master farmers or individuals who are skilled in a trade such as carpentry and metallurgy, medical professionals, individuals who are religious or spiritual leaders, and the list can go on and on and on. It can help recognize and leverage existing assets for community development and empowerment, contributing to future growth. And then the third one is PPGIS, or Public Participatory GIS. I do not have any experience in this method, but I wanted to introduce this as an option for those who are certified in GIS. I am not certified in GIS. It is a form of community mapping that combines GIS technology with these public participation methods. Basically, it aims to engage community members in the process of creating and using spatial data and maps to inform decision-making and planning. They provide their local knowledge, perspectives, and insights in the creation of these maps, and often using tools such as web-based mapping platforms, mobile apps, or GIS software. And the final one is volunteered generated information, or just VGI for short. Again, I do not have any practical experience in this method, but wanted to let you know about its existence as yet another commonly used method in this space. It uses data and information collected and crowdsourced from volunteers on the web, and it can really be effective when you don't have a lot of available data in regions that are hard to access or don't have any previous secondary research. I have an example of this at later slides. And just quickly before we go to the next slide, I have an example on the right. As you can see here, this is from a participatory map pulled from a 2012 study in India, which dealt with the intersection of culture, mental health, and ecology. Researchers collaborated with community members to map their local natural resources, such as fresh water, food, timber for fuel, homeopathic medicines, etc. So as you can see on the bottom left, which is on the previous slide still, sorry about that, you can see that they mapped even locations of like dangerous fauna, such as tigers, as you can see there. And they even have other interesting landmarks, such as the fortune teller's evil eye to the bottom right. You know, during this process, researchers endeavored to get the perspectives of the community members, and they took this information a step further and tried to get high-level insights out of these landmarks that they were located, trying to get what emotions could be emoted from these specific labels. For example, the tigers at the bottom left would often emote anxiety and fear, right? For obvious reasons. But even to the top right, they found that this community has been suffering from intermittent droughts over the last few years, probably exacerbated by climate change. And, you know, the drying up of river resources can also create a sense of anxiety. This is basically trying to take the information that they receive from communities and contributing it to their purpose of their research, which was a study on the intersection of culture, mental health, and their ecology. You know, this example reminds me of my experience when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Guinea from 2016 to 2019. One of the first things I did when I was integrated in my community, I actually did a similar exercise with a bunch of flip chart paper taped together. And we went ahead and mapped out all the important landmarks of the community, you know, starting with, you know, the brick and mortar landmarks, family households, small shops, a local mosque, things like that. Then we moved on to outlying plantations and planned forestry areas. And then we started mapping out, you know, the skills of some of the people in the community and, you know, figuring out who I would go to solve such and such problem and stuff like that. And it was a really collaborative process. It was a good bonding experience. I learned a lot about a community that would have taken months for me to figure out on my own, doing it piecemeal. And we were able to find solutions to challenges. One example is that this exercise allowed us to realize that armyworms was a huge issue for the maize crops, and not only in this community, but the entire sub-county that we worked in. So we were able to identify an endemic pesticide made of natural materials, the key ingredient being leaves from a neem tree, and we completely eradicated the armyworm infestation in the sub-county. So that's just an example of how you can take this information, find issues, and work together to solve an issue. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, and this is just quick. Here are just two more examples. I wanted to show these two examples to just show the sheer breadth of options that researchers have at their disposal when using participatory mapping. On the left, you can see something that's quite advanced. Researchers use both GIS and 3D printing technology to create this large topographic map of a community and surrounding environment. And then, of course, in a group, these community members can pinpoint various landmarks of interest and importance on that topographic map. And on the right, you have something that's far less complicated, but by all means, it is not an ineffective exercise. You can see that community members map their community in the dirt and the ground using branches and stones. Again, you can use, if you have access to GIS technology and 3D printing, by all means, make that beautiful map. But I was able to find successes when I was in the Peace Corps in Guinea, just using flip chart paper. So If you are bereft of certain technological advancements, please do not be discouraged in implementing this method. Next slide, please. And this final example of participatory mapping, before I quickly go on the seasonal calendars, this is from Caracas, Venezuela, where they use the volunteer generated information, or the VGI technique that I mentioned earlier. They utilize this map specifically to map important landmarks, services, and micro projects across various interconnected favela communities. The researchers that were implementing this, they trained community members throughout all the favelas and trained them to use easy mapping technology, such as Google My Maps, to help identify and crowdsource relevant information, such as locational libraries, markets, health facilities, and many, many other things. The ultimate goal of this project was to achieve a better understanding of the social services and micro development projects that were being provided to these communities, as to help improve overall cohesion and layering amongst all these initiatives, thereby hoping to maximize impact if done correctly. As mentioned earlier, VGI and leveraging its inherent crowdsourcing functionality is an effective method when working in large areas with little to no secondary data, such as in this Venezuela case study where social services had never been methodically mapped before this exercise. I have included the link to this research study in our resources page if anyone's interested in learning more about how they utilize VGI. Next slide, please. And finally, here's a very simplified process of how to do participatory mapping. Again, it can look vastly different across methodologies, but I just wanted to give a basic outline as to help set the foundation for any of your future research designs. I know I'm running out of time, so I'll just probably blaze through this real quick. Phase one deals with the initial research and design. It's important to note when you're doing equitable research, you must consider where in the process local community members can participate. It's really important to try to involve local community members at all stages of the process wherever possible. And that's where participatory mapping or seasonal calendars can come into play, at least in the phase of initial data collection. Phase two is data gathering. That's pretty self-explanatory. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with quantitative and qualitative data collection. So using things like interviews, focus groups, quantitative surveys, and so on and so forth. Phase three is data analysis. Again, pretty self-explanatory. This is where you analyze the information you got from the maps, try to find those high-level insights that relate to the purpose and goal of your project, and of course, categorizing and coding your information. Phase four is actually very important, the communication. Oftentimes we write these high-level esoteric reports just to give to a donor, a client, or other implementing partners that are very well-versed in community development and various other sectors that you're working in. But it's also important to make sure that you present your findings to the communities that you are gathering data from, because as equitable researchers, we do not want to be extractive. We need to make sure that the information and data we're collecting gets relayed back to the community and that it's easily understandable so they can use that information to solve their own challenges that they might be facing. And that leads to phase five, which is creating solutions, right? Like for instance, my Peace Corps example, when I helped facilitate solution to the armyworm infestation. Next slide, please. And here's an example of seasonal calendars. I only have two examples. So this is a basic one. The next one will be a more formalized one. This example is taken from a community workshop done in Sri Lanka. Again, just using flip chart paper, very low tech, akin to what I did in the Peace Corps. On the right, I zoomed in on the key, which elucidates all the symbols and what they mean. As you can see, they mapped various different things like specific crops such as rice, maize, chili, etc. Periods of food scarcity and surpluses, periods of price variability, rainfall, climate shocks such as droughts and cyclones, and even important events such as festivals and holidays, as you can see at the bottom. As a way to analyze, you can analyze this in many different ways. As one example, as you see in the months of November and December, there is food scarcity, the prices are high, and income generation among households is very low, as you can see on what was mapped. Compounded by the fact that the month of November has the highest rates of dengue fever, probably exacerbated by a couple months prior of rainfall, which could debilitate people who are income generators for their households. You can find that the months of November and December is where you want to ramp up a lot of your implementation. For example, if you are a food security project, you may want to have food vouchers for the months of November and December to help mitigate food scarcity and so on and so forth. And next slide, please. This is the last slide. As you see, this is a much more organized and neater example of a seasonal calendar. You can take that flip chart information that you got from that community workshop in Sri Lanka, and you can transform it into a data visualization such as this, which can be more easily digestible, and you can distribute it amongst other stakeholders, clients, implementing partners for reference in their own respective activities. This specific example is from a USAID-funded project called Famine Early Warning Systems Network, or just FuseNet for short. FuseNet in general is a very useful resource for data on things related to food security, climate change, and resilience. They provide critical information to programs trying to address shocks and stresses, such as related to food crises, price fluctuations, conflict, natural disasters, etc. I provide the link to the site's homepage in our resources section if you're interested to kind of explore all the information they have to offer. It's really fascinating and useful. Anyways, this one specific resource represents Kenya at the national level. FuseNet does have other information at more regional, local levels, depending on their level of access in these areas. As you can see, this example separates Kenya into two different regions. It is less detailed than the Sri Lanka example that I showed first, such as they did not disaggregate the planting seasons into specific crops, but this can still provide valuable information and give you a better understanding of when the periods of shocks and stresses are, at least at a national level, before you start doing a much more granular, in-depth research in various regions or communities you may be working in. Mainly, I just included this example to show how you can visualize this data. So yeah, that's everything. So I will give this to my colleague, Zachariah, to introduce his tool. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jeremy and Netta. And actually, before we move on to Zachariah, a few questions have come in. So I just want to give our panelists a chance to respond to some of those, and then we'll move on to our final presenter, Zachariah. One question that came in the chat is, why equity in evaluation and not equality in evaluation? Netta, would you like to take that?
Absolutely. So the thing with equality as opposed to equity, equality assumes that we all need the same things, that we're all starting from the same place. We all share similar perspectives. And so we are treating everything equal, right? And in terms of participatory tools, it's like we assume that all of our participants are coming from a similar perspective and need equal attention, right? An equal amount of space and equal amount of time to elevate their voices. Equity understands that we are not all the same and that systems in place are not all designed the same and impact people differently. As such, equity ensures that we design and implement evaluations from a space of understanding this subconscious layer of things not being equal or fair. So equity balances it out, right? You're trying to understand that this person's starting here and we need to be right here. We understand that this person, given their experiences and where they are, our invested community member is starting from a place that may need more time and more of their voice needs to be heard for this evaluation to be successful and truly inclusive. There's a really good picture, and I can link to it here for our moderators to share about the difference between equity and equality. And so I'll drop that there for everyone.
Thank you, Netta. And there was one other question that came in during your presentation. Somebody asked if empowering participants might simultaneously be a strength and a challenge.
I think It depends on why you would see it as a challenge. To empower your participants is to empower them to to elevate their needs. I will say, though, that when you're empowering participants, there can be a time where the participants are, again, unaware or are not as knowledgeable to give you the information that you are seeking. And so in that way, it can certainly be challenging on part of the evaluator. But I do not see it as ever being something I would say you shouldn't go for it. You should totally go for it. You should totally empower your participants to elevate their needs, to take up space and take up voice in your evaluation. Yeah, and that's it.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
And I'd like to check in with Sarah, who's moderating the Facebook feed. Sarah, have we had any questions come in there?
Currently no questions on the Facebook feed. Thanks, Dori.
Oh, okay. Well, we actually did have a couple more here in our Q&A, so I'll just go ahead with those. One person asked, sometimes, oh, and this is referring to, I believe, the tools that Jeremy was sharing. Sometimes with this type of tool, the exercise and the interaction with communities is more exciting than the data analysis part, where sometimes I feel that a lot of data is lost or not communicated. Any tips on how to deal with this challenge?
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I definitely agree with you. I think the data collection aspect, especially if it's something as participatorily as this, like actually communicating with people, hearing their stories, hearing their emotions, can be much more fun than the actual analysis phase. You know, and that could be a whole other presentation on its own, right? The coding and the categorizing of qualitative research. And I don't think there is one premier way that's perfect, right? That's going to extract 100% of the insights that you can get from these opportunities. I just think it is important before going into these sessions that you do your own legwork and your own research, not only on the technical background of whatever project you may be working on or whatever type of research that you're doing, but also having a stronger understanding of the community or communities that you're working in. First of all, this just builds trust with the communities, right? It shows that you actually care about their stories, care about their inner machinations. But this also allows you to have a much better and ingrained understanding of the data and information that you may be getting. It's hard to kind of come up with tips and tricks on qualitative coding and categorizing without having an example to show you. So I know we have a lot of resources from our qualitative methods course that could be shared at the end of this. And I know in my practicum that I did a lot of focus group discussions and one-on-one interviews. And I found that, you know, I came up with some codes, some data codes before I started the interviews, but as you go through things, more information that you never even thought of comes up. It comes back to the beginning when I said, you don't know what you don't know. And that's why participatory tools can be so helpful. And as you kind of read through these stories, more codes and more themes come up. Now, I imagine this could be difficult for an individual who may be more adroit at the quantitative side of things with numbers. For me, I'm better on the qualitative side. I love stories, and I can find, for me, my brain works that way. I can more easily find themes and significance in the stories that people tell me. So I don't know if I answered that question best, but maybe we can share some resources specifically in qualitative data coding that could be helpful.
Thanks, that would be great. And along those same lines, we actually did also have a question come in. Are there resources that you could recommend describing the participatory mapping process in detail? So
yeah, so in the resources page in this PowerPoint, I include a lot of resources on mapping and calendars, replete with text articles, visuals, and even YouTube videos. So it should be a good launching point for you to understand not only how to use this method, but all the varying different methods down from using flip chart paper all the way to GIS mapping. So yeah, here you see a bunch of resources here that you can start looking through.
great, thank you so much for making those available to all of us. And we do have a few more questions that have come in, but I want to make sure we have time for Zachariah's presentation. So we'll move on to that now, and there will be more time at the end for further questions. So feel free to keep putting those in the chat or the Q&A as we move on. And now I'd like to invite Zachariah to take it away.
Thank you, Dori. And thank you, Netta and Jeremy, to my colleagues for an excellent presentation of the participatory tools they shared and some of that underlying theory of why we use participatory tools. My name is Zachariah Barghouti. I'm based in Oakland, California. I'm an evaluation associate at a culturally responsive and equitable research and evaluation consulting firm. I consider myself an emerging evaluator. I've been in the field for a few years now. I'm also an alumnus of the Master's in Measurement and Evaluation program at American University. And today I'll be talking about the participatory tool called the Bridge Model. And I think it's a great tool for evaluators to keep in their back pocket. So I want to dig right into it. I want to first talk about some of the theory behind this participatory method. And by extension, this does apply to other participatory evaluation methods. So the Bridge Model is a great participatory tool to use in evaluation. It is a really broad tool that I'm sure it has and can be used beyond evaluation. And perhaps its simplicity lends to that. And I think that its simplicity is what might make it the most powerful. The Bridge Model facilitates participatory visioning and planning. So many of our evaluations will be done at different times at various points in the project. And this tool is really most useful for evaluations when done in the analysis, planning, and reviewing phases. And the participatory element refers to the inclusion of evaluation contributors or community members, or the group of people participating in the Bridge Model with you. And the reason for the inclusion of evaluation contributors or community members in this process has to do with the concept of beneficence or to do good. Many of you may have heard of this concept before. It's used in different fields, one being the medical field. And so that also includes doing no harm, which you may have heard of as well. So in this case, that means using tools and approaches that elevate the well-being of participants as a high priority in the study design. And if we take the Bridge Model and we look at it from this perspective, this tool allows evaluation contributors to exercise their own agency in defining the issues at hand, visioning a future in which these issues are resolved and what that would explicitly look like, and supports them in brainstorming what might be the gaps that need to be closed to get closer to the future that they want to see. So the Bridge Model might be used in place of, alongside, or to supplement a needs assessment, and it promotes beneficence in two ways. It involves the community in designing program implementation, and it enables them to identify strengths and areas for improvement. So engaging community members in the process facilitates the alignment of program implementation and evaluation design with the community's specific needs, and it helps the evaluation become more beneficial to the community. And it also helps the community see how beneficial evaluation is or can be to them. So since this tool really puts the participants in the driver's seat of visioning and planning, what you're doing as the evaluator is essentially taking on the role of a facilitator and engaging the participants in sharing. Next slide, please. So what I personally loved about using this tool with a community-based organization is that it levels the playing field when it comes to evaluation because it created a learning moment for everyone in the group simultaneously. especially when many in the group had never met in person due to the pandemic. And so you might find that you might use this tool for different purposes, but I will share the purpose that I used it for. In terms of the issues, I found that it really helped me understand how evaluation contributors and how the community see and understand the issues themselves. And I believe since a lot of them had not met and talked about some of these issues prior to this exercise, it was also the first time for them as an organization and as community members involved within the organization to see how others within the organization and the community understand those issues too. So it turns out that in my experience so far, that this helped the organization I worked with in evaluating their program at a critical point, where they experienced a need to make a big change and go in a different direction than they initially set out to do. And to achieve this successfully, they really wanted to build a common vision for the organization. So this is why the tool was appropriate to use, but I will caution that it's not appropriate to use in every phase or scenario. The specific ask of the participants in this bridge model exercise that I facilitated here was about where they are as a community rather than as an organization or as individuals. And then the participants thought about where they wanted the community to be. Lastly, they thought about the middle section of the bridge, which are the key factors or challenges that would need to be addressed to transform the conditions on the left, where they currently are, into the conditions on the right, or where they want to be. So how does this have to do with evaluation? The aim of the conversation was to facilitate a segue into building a theory of change that would build on what they said are the key factors or challenges that would need to be addressed to see their improved conditions. This I found was really helpful for people because it was an opportunity to design a program that addresses the challenges informed by this exercise. So in thinking about some of the best times that I would use a bridge model, came up with a short list that might help you think about when you would use this. In my experience, I found that working with a community-based organization on this exercise proved to be very beneficial for them, but you could find that other types of community organizations or even other organizations that are not necessarily community-based could benefit from this when looking at particular issues that are coming up within the organization at a particular point in time. There are a lot of ways that you can use the bridge model. So some of the times that you would use it are included in this list, which are when you're building a common vision or refining a mission statement or the mission of the organization. So a lot of times we find ourselves sometimes at odds. Within one organization, there might be different opposing views, and that might have to do with a broader dynamic that really you cannot control. So thinking about how you build a common vision or how you refine a mission when it comes to challenges where people are feeling stuck in the organization and they're really looking to change directions. Another one is creating structure. Most, at least in the United States, a lot of small nonprofits with smaller budgets do not have a budget for evaluation and learning within their organizations. And so I think this can be incredibly helpful for those organizations lacking that to help them create structure in terms of what they're trying to achieve. Another one is scoping future projects when an organization is looking at whether it's feasible to take on a project or whether a future project might actually be beneficial or not. This is something that you could use to assess that together with the community. Another one is journey mapping, which is a little bit different than the use that I did. Journey mapping would, you could use this tool to facilitate an exercise that allows you to see the journey that one individual takes, or a person that ideally would use a service or be a beneficiary of an organization, and the journey that they take from first being introduced to the organization to after receiving program services, and what the impact would be on that person. So you could say, here is a profile of Jane or John Doe, who would be a participant in this particular project. And typically this is where most of our participants fall when they first come into the organization. So that's where they are. And so you would want to build a journey map to see where, how the program takes them from where they are to where they would want to be, according to what the program logic model would be. Another one is reevaluating strategy. That happens a lot. And so that is kind of one reason that I did use this model, is to reevaluate the strategy. This organization that I did it with really wanted to focus on science, technology, engineering, and math, otherwise known as STEM, for youth. After realizing that this was not the right project for them, they wanted to shift gears and really find what is the community need that they could help address with their organization. So they wanted to completely shift direction. So it was really helpful for them to hear from the community, what are the problems that exist? What do they see as a future that they want to be part of and that they want to help build? And what are some of the challenges in getting there? Evaluation planning as well. This was really also an exercise in evaluation planning, because it was meant to build the basis or foundation for a later theory of change and logic model. And project implementation, although I think it's best used outside of project implementation. I think that the bridge model can be useful in points in time where you'd like folks to take action or support action taking. And so that is it. I was able to hopefully present what the bridge model is, when the best time to use it is. It is a very broad tool and can be used in many scenarios. So I hope that you all do get a chance to use this tool at some point in your evaluation career. Thank you.
Thank you, Zachariah. And we've had quite a number of questions come in, so we can move into some of those now, but I'd first like to check in with Sarah and see if we also have any questions on the Facebook feed.
No, ma'am, no questions on the Facebook feed.
Okay. Let me know if any come in, and otherwise we'll go ahead with some of the ones that have come in here. Regarding the bridge model, one question is how this model differs from a theory of change or the logic model of an intervention, and also how it varies or how it differs from problem tree analysis, a method of determining the underlying cause and effect of a problem.
Yeah, great questions. So as I said, this tool was used to get information from the community and to share it in a participatory way simultaneously with people that may have not understood the full breadth of the issues that the community was facing. Of course, this was a community approach, so a lot of folks that were in the room were directly facing some of these issues and were in the community. And so it was really, it goes back to what Jeremy was saying, you don't know what you don't know. And so for us, it was really about getting on the same page all at one time about what the issues were, what the future looks like, and what were some of the challenges in getting there. So that's incredibly helpful to really have that context when you're building a logic model. A logic model is, I think, a little bit more specific than this, because it does have a pathway of how you get from the resources that you have the activities that you would want to implement in order to deal with some of the challenges that were identified in the bridge model. And in terms of, the specific outcomes, a lot of them can actually be tied to the bridge model. So that's why I said it's a segue to the logic model, because it doesn't neatly identify all of the different pieces of the logic model that you would need to be able to actually implement activities and track them in terms of outputs and outcomes. So, thinking about, the data sources that you would need, none of that is included in the bridge model. This is really just about identifying the issues and really more of the long-term and some of the short-term impacts and outcomes that folks would want to see. And so I think that this is really not necessarily project-based, and it had nothing to do with the organization. So the logic model is very much focused on the organization, and the bridge model is very much focused on the community and how the community sees the issues. So that really is the major difference in it. The logic model just drills in and explains how the organization is going to tackle some of the issues that the bridge model has unveiled or revealed. I hope that helps.
Thanks for that detailed reply. And another person asked, how much time would you set aside to create a bridge model like the one that you shared with us today?
That's excellent. So this was done virtually through Google Jamboard. Not a proponent of any one particular piece of technology, but I think that there are many others out there as well that would help you do that. What I did was actually take a silhouette or an image of a bridge that you can find anywhere, or you can actually do this if you're in person, draw a bridge and separate the sections of where we are, the key factors in the middle or challenges in the middle, and at the end, where we want to be. And so what you would do is facilitate this conversation and really have the community be the ones that put Post-it notes in each section. So after you explain to them the exercise and what each section means, what I would do is start with where we are, then go to where we want to be, and then go to the key factors. I will just say that this is not necessarily an asset-based approach, but it can be stringed together, and I think it would be helpful to string together this approach with another approach to follow up on it, because it can have people feel like, all right, well, we've identified this. What is the next step in order for us to address some of these issues? And this tool doesn't really do that. It just kind of gets you to that foundation of understanding the issues, but you would have to add another element to it that could really help bring in some of the specifics so that you could build a logic model, for example, or that you could take action on one piece. What I did after this was actually get people to rank the top 5 challenges that they wanted to work on as a community to address. So you'd see in the middle there are multiple challenges, but to really get started, we wanted to get 5 and we rank them from least to greatest challenge. And that way we were able to really see where our resources were best put to be able to address them. So it is a supplement to other tools.
Thanks, Zachariah. I'd like to mention, because it's nearly the top of the hour, that we can stay for another 15 minutes. I believe Netta has to go. Thanks so much for being here, Netta, and sharing with all of us. And for everyone who is able to stay, we can stay for another 15 minutes and continue to answer more of these questions. If anyone didn't get a chance to have your question answered and you need to go, I believe Sarah put in the chat the links to the LinkedIn profiles of our presenters today, so you can contact them directly to ask any questions that we may not have a chance to address today. But we can stay for 15 more minutes and see how many of these we're able to get through. So another question that someone asked is due to power dynamics, sometimes it is very difficult to ensure participation of targeted communities. How can we overcome this challenge?
I can start, but I think since Neda and Jeremy had to go, anyone can really take this if they have any, as we say, we're all the experts here, and participatory approaches require a mindset of really putting sometimes the community in the driver's seat. So if anybody has any ideas, please feel free to pop them in the chat if you all have had some experiences. So the question is really about how do we ensure including others? Is that right?
Yes, how can we ensure that targeted communities are included? So to me, it sounds like that means disenfranchised or marginalized communities, those who are less likely to be heard.
And maybe while you're thinking about it, Zach, we can reference the example that Jeremy gave us around dealing with potential power dynamics when we're doing participatory mapping, doing our homework first, understanding what the dynamics are in the community, and then saying maybe we'll have multiple sessions so that young people feel they can speak up and they don't have to worry about speaking in front of maybe older folks or elders in the community, and then once you've gathered all of that information, figuring out then how do I present it in a cohesive fashion to everybody that has been available to me. So it can be really useful to have cross-generational or cross-power conversations, but sometimes you need to start that process by splitting folks out so that they're in a space that's conducive to speaking openly. But I would love to hear your thoughts, Zach.
Thank you, Sarah. That is great. Yeah, I know that this particular question really gets at a huge issue in our field in terms of making sure that people that are directly impacted are included in our evaluations, and the focus population of the evaluation has a voice in the evaluation. And so thinking about that and thinking how to best make sure that your evaluation process is inclusive and is open and makes people feel safe. There are a lot of things to think about. The idea that a lot of people are hesitant to participate in an evaluation for many reasons, and what you can do to kind of mitigate some of that risk is also important. Another one is, in terms of having recruitment strategies that are inclusive by using language that's inclusive, by using the language that people speak in. So if you're thinking about having a focused population that you really want, a particular type of person, maybe let's say mothers who speak a particular language, and you'd really like the inclusion of folks who speak this language. Of course, your recruitment materials, if they're in a different language, they won't necessarily reach those folks. So thinking about a lot of those kind of administrative ways as well. And then, where you meet people where they're at, of course. People are also busy. Folks are working, so thinking about times that you could facilitate a tool like this, which takes, like the bridge model, for example, what takes time, right? The seasonal calendars and the other tools discussed, they do take time. So thinking about where are people already at, and meeting them there rather than having them come to you, it can be useful. But there are a lot of aspects to this, and I'm sure I'm missing some, but I just wanted to touch on a couple of them, including making sure that the process is inclusive in terms of language and access, and then in terms of making sure that you're meeting people where they're at.
Great, thank you both. And we also did have a question about how we can mainstream gender in these participatory tools, which I think is connected to what we've already been talking about. If you have any additional thoughts to add specifically related to gender, otherwise we'll move on to the next question.
I think, one thing to say is probably the same as I just mentioned in terms of, if gender is a component, a lens, a perspective in which your evaluation is taking, and equitable evaluations are, in fact, in terms of gender, we want to make sure that our evaluations are responsive to gender. So what that means is when you have a process that's really open to anyone, but you're really looking at like a focus population. Let's say, you're working within a community, but you really want to know what, young girls, for example, between ages this and this age. And that's really your focus population. But you want to be able to talk to everybody. I think it works as well to sometimes keep things open, and then take what you need in terms of gender by keeping the process open, but just looking at and focusing in and honing in on your population that you're interested in. And so sometimes that also helps, because a lot of times when you say things that like this is only for this group or only for this group, in some cultures, it just doesn't work that way. If you're going into a school, but you're only looking at some people within the class, you want to be sure that the activities are open to all as well, so that it doesn't create a potential atmosphere where people are self-selecting into something, and then you get kind of bad data in that way.
And another question we've gotten is whether there's a toolkit for the bridge model, or a guide, or some kind of template that people can replicate and use. Do you have any resources that we can share?
Yes, I will share a resource. It's, I believe the website is We Adapt, and it's in the resources slide there. But that one has a facilitator's guide to using the bridge model, which I think is important, because again, this is more of a facilitator tool than it is a tool that will allow you to put your evaluation hat on in the moment. That really comes after.
All right, and here's a question that came in during Jeremy's presentation. So I'm not sure, now that isn't here, if you feel comfortable responding to this one, Zachariah, but I will read it. The question is there a verifier during the mapping process when people or stakeholders do not have sufficient evidence regarding the subject matter? So I think this is referring to some sort of vetting process or way of knowing that the participants have actual evidence to back up their contributions.
I mean, I think that's an important question, and I think what it's getting at is, I believe is the data that we're getting from these seasonal count, is it verified by the community? Would that be?
I think that's how I'm understanding it. Like, is there a way to know that the input, the information being given by community members is accurate? How do we know that they are a trustworthy source of information? That's how I'm understanding it.
That's a great question. And I think triangulating your data is a great way to do that. But also, one thing with data like this is that you could incorporate member checking, which is something done frequently in qualitative research, which means just presenting the data back to the community and saying, hey, is this accurate? So once you collect data, and this can be something you do with the bridge model as well, is just taking that extra step slowing things down a bit, not assuming that you do have the correct data and that that the data that you have is an accurate representation of what the community actually gave you as well. Because sometimes when you're facilitating, you might interpret things differently. And so if people are putting in Post-it notes, for example, you may interpret that Post-it note differently than what the person intended when they wrote it. And so thinking about that when you're in a phase of after you've collected the data to kind of synthesize and analyze, you want to present that data back to the community if you really need that check. And that does make it more participatory, because you're saying, hey, this is what you told us. Is this accurate? Does this feel right to you? Or if there's anything inaccurate, can you please point it out? And so kind of involving the community, that extra additional verification step as well in a participatory way can be done. But you can also take that and kind of verify it through other ways as well.
Great, thanks. And I'd like to share some feedback or some additional responses shared by a couple of our participants here today. One person wrote, to ensure everyone participates, first one needs to understand the dynamism of the community and identify those who are usually less involved in participation. Understanding the kind of community involved will help you also choose the types of participation tools to use. And another participant wrote, I think the 3 Ps are important to make a participatory evaluation a success. P, product of the evaluation, is a part of broader scope setting that determines the second P, people, whose voice should the evaluation count. Finally, the third P is process, needs to be appropriate to those involved in the process that is meant to be participatory. Process determines what tools and methods are appropriate in the given context, taking the potential dynamics, including GESI, into consideration. So thank you to those who contributed your input as well. And we are just about out of time here. So again, if we didn't have time to get to your questions, feel free to contact the presenters directly via LinkedIn. And now I'd like to pass it along to Sarah to close us out for today's webinar.
Cool. Thank you, Dori, and thank you to Zachariah and Netta and Jeremy for your presentations today. They were fantastically interesting. We've dropped the link to the slides in the chat, and there should be a way for you to access the recording soon after this. So just a couple notes that I had written down from like a very, very detailed presentation here. I think one of the big things that I'm taking away is that participatory evaluation is a set of tools, but it's also a mindset. Like, it is the way that you approach being an evaluator, and that your role is around focusing on and strengthening equity. So all of these tools provide a framework for how we can put equity into action. It helps us think more expansively about inclusion and about what is and what is not being evaluated and collected. There are important considerations to take into account. We want to really think about time. These processes are time intensive on purpose. It is how you approach a community with respect, that you are not rushing through something, that you are creating a space where everyone can come as they are. You can meet the community where they are. We need to be thinking about selecting the right participants and creating the right spaces to deal with power dynamics and other complicating factors. We learned a lot about participatory mapping, and in the slides you can find all of those details. I think things that Jeremy highlighted that were important to me is that this is about figuring out how to confer ownership of the process to the community that you're working with. And it's tapping into that tacit knowledge within the community. And finally, empowering them to address their own local issues, which contributes to sustainability in the long term. And then, Zachariah took us through the bridge tool. These tools elevate the well-being of participants and contributors as kind of one of their primary drivers. It puts participants in the driver's seat of that visioning and sharing. It can be used in a specific context. It can be used in an overall context. And it's especially important when you're thinking about strategy and future planning. So we want to really thank everyone for joining us today. Our next webinar will be in July on communicating results, I believe. So stay tuned however you found out about this webinar, and that you'll get more information through those channels in the future. I think that covers us for today. And again, thanks for the participation from all over the world. We invite your questions and comments and ideas for what you'd like to see in future conversations, but we hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you very much for joining and for everyone for speaking. Much appreciated.
Thank you.